Hi, this is Khizra Munir, and welcome to Wowcast, a podcast brought to you by Women of the World Festival, Pakistan, now in its 10th year. For the last decade, we've been celebrating amazing Pakistani women from all across the industries, from entertainment to homemakers to business women to finance. And now we're taking it a step further. We're sitting them down and having conversations. So, this isn't just a podcast, it's a community, and we want you to be a part of it. So, let's get into it. So, how do women gain financial autonomy in a system that wasn't built for them? We don't talk to women about money. We exclude them from these conversations. Very few women have financial independence, financial inclusion. We still need to have that conversation. But our guest today, Raida Latif, is breaking those barriers. From Chief Marketing Officer at the Pakistan Stock Exchange to now Executive Director at Standard Chartered, Raida is bringing a new wave of financial inclusion, conversations about finance. She's bringing strategy. She's bringing a narrative that only a woman could bring to this space. But that's not all we're going to talk about. Raida is charting territories in finance, but she's also charting territories in adventure, in other space where women are often excluded and not expected to be. So before we get into it, and before I say too much, let's get started. Hi, Raida. Welcome to Wowcast. We're so excited to have you.
Hello. Thank you. And I'm equally excited to be
You're not
here.
nervous, are you?
No, I'm not nervous.
Okay, good. So we're just gonna jump right into the questions because I feel like there's so much we want to extract out of you.
Wow.
Okay, so starting off, you worked in some of the most male-dominated spaces in finance, but now when you like introduce yourself to people beyond the titles and everything, what do you say? How do you like introduce yourself?
I think after spending about 20 odd years in the industry, I don't really need to introduce myself.
Yeah,
So I would say, I mean, if I walk in and, I say I'm Raida, I think that should be enough.
yeah.
But other than that, how I see myself, I feel I am a brand builder. I'm a connector between people and capital. I look at it that way. And also helping people find their space in the financial ecosystem, I would say.
Okay. So for like a non-finance person, what does that mean?
For a non-finance person, I would say it's like elevating them or propelling them into the arena, learning the language of finance. That's where I come in as a mentor, as a helper, as a partner, I would say. Because when you the language of finance is not something you're born with, or it doesn't come naturally to you.
Right.
It is something you acquire, you learn, and that's imperative, and especially when it comes to women, I would say.
Okay. And so before we get further into like the tougher questions, what is one thing about like your daily life, about your personality that people might find interesting or like out of character?
I think generally people who know me professionally would look at or think I am somebody who's organized, has lots of to-do lists and sheets and everything. But along with that, I think there's another part where I am more intuitive, I would say. I'm more creative, and I apply that creativity to the work. So I try to bring in a balance of being organized and to the point and practical with a bit of a hint of creativity, I would say. A lot of people don't know me. I mean, as a person, I have a different I would say a different outlook,
Persona.
a different persona. I write poetry, I studied literature. So that bit, professionally, people don't know me. So I think that's something.
And so you've worked across continents and in different markets. Um, what are some of your earlier experiences that have sort of shaped the way you show up now?
I think the very fact that, as a child also, I was part of the male dominated rooms. I would accompany my father in his get togethers. His friends would come. I would go and sit down and hear those conversations.
Right.
So, when you hear those conversations, you actually also realize there's a lot more to life, to the world, from a political angle, from an economic angle, across the various, I would say, sectors or segments. You get to learn that. You also learn, um, who has a voice on the table and who doesn't.
Yeah.
And that gap, as a child, I was very aware and deeply aware of that gap. And I learned that, unless you have that clarity, that confidence, that hold on your subject matter, you won't get that space or that voice on the table. You won't come to that. And I think that's one of the reasons I would say that I've been attentive to what's going on around me, and aware of things. And I think that's helped me shape into the person I am today.
And so, from your experience in the leadership roles you've had, you were chief marketing officer at the Pakistan Stock Exchange, you're executive director at Standard Chartered now. What have these roles taught you about leadership and about how women are sort of sometimes kept out of these spaces, kept out of decision making roles, and how you have been able to position yourself there?
I think traditionally, I would say women have been out of, I would say, decision making roles. Having said that, it's not a lack of capability, it's a lack of that, I would say, inclusivity, that confidence from the other party in women. But I think I've been privileged, where I look at myself at the stock exchange also, and here at Standard Chartered as well. I've been privileged to have those leaders, those people at the helm of affairs, who believe in gender inclusivity, who have that confidence, and who do not look at women as separate species, who do not have certain abilities or potential. In fact, they're more aware and cognizant of the value that women bring to the table. So I think I've been lucky that way, and I do not see myself as a woman when I speak, when I'm part of those conversations,
Right.
or I'm in the boardroom. I look at myself or feel that I'm a professional who has an equal voice and who has an opinion, which has to be heard.
And just following up on that, so like when we're talking about, and you've mostly been in the space of finance, and when we think about finance, we think of numbers, but your roles have been all about strategy and communication. Why do you think narrative is such a powerful part of leadership?
I think narrative, you see, data gives you numbers and facts, but narrative is one thing that actually inspires. Storytelling inspires. And for women also, I think unless there is a narrative that supports the numbers and the data, you don't get anywhere. You're not able to inspire confidence, you're not able to tell the story, you're not able to engage. So I think narrative is part of inclusivity. It's not a side note.
Yeah.
It's something that is at the crux or the heart of the matter. And unless data is wrapped in narrative, you are not able to put across your your view, your vision. So I think it's imperative to have narrative around the numbers.
And so, like, piggybacking off the last two questions I asked you, you being in these leadership roles and not feeling like, and saying that you don't sort of even think of yourself as a woman when you're in those spaces, because you are their equal, and it's all, everyone's on the same table having the same conversation, you are bringing the same thing to the table. There's no gender difference. And then talking about this, bringing narrative to the conversation. Do you think you being a woman still brings a certain value to it? Because there are some nuances to being a woman. There are some, extra sort of intuitive aspects that we bring to the table. Do
I
you
think
think that
that is
is an
the
edge you have?
addition. That's an edge. That's the value addition. Plus, I think and there's another aspect. Instead of being intimidated by people around you, I, 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 uh, I I feel it's important to have a grasp on the subject. If you know your subject well and you've done your preparation and you speak in a clear, uncluttered voice with the right
Yeah.
messaging, I think there's no barriers there, really.
And
Another thing, let me just add to
Okay.
it. With the way women look at things, we have a multi-dimensional view.
See, that's what I wanted to hear.
Okay.
Tell me about that.
And we're good at multitasking, and we're good at looking at things from a very broad angle and bringing in various perspectives. So the humane perspective, the softer aspect of everything, the strategic view, coupled with the hardcore facts,
Yeah.
we're able to add more value.
Yeah.
I think that's something, and even at the organization, as I said earlier in one of my responses, that I've been lucky in that way, that I work for organizations where people at the helm of affairs believe in women, in the power of women leadership. And where I am working today, there are women in the frontline businesses, there are women in audit and risk, there are women in brand, there are women in social impact. So whether it's the frontline or the support segments of the organization, women are there in the leadership roles. So I think that goes to say and show that where there's a breadth of vision, women will be there.
That's what I wanted to hear. So what does good governance look like from the inside? And how does it become a tool for like inclusion and ethical institutions? Like, how does that sort of impact it on a bigger
See,
scale?
governance, if you look at governance as compliance, it's a failure. Governance is about transparency, it's about visibility, it's about ethical foresight. It's so when you're sitting inside and you talk about governance, it's not just inclusivity as a little piece or a segment in it. Inclusivity is, I would say, intertwined with governance. When, as an organization, I mean, I've worked at various organizations, and I can actually say globally also, when organizations include, I would say, add inclusivity and that lens within the governance ambit, it helps them achieve success. Whether it's global organizations, even locally in Pakistan, if we look around us, there are larger corporates, there are multinationals, where you see, inclusivity is part of their DNA. And those organizations have been successful, not just, I would say, successful in financially also, but also in bringing that positive impact in the ecosystem around us. So, and I think there's a lot of work to be done. The conversations are happening, but 80%, 90% of the country are SMEs. And that inclusivity will come in once they adopt and adapt governance. Actually, it's not, as I said, it should not be a tick box.
Exactly.
And that's what's happening. Although at the regulatory angles, there's a lot of stress and focus on adopting good governance. Unless organizations realize, it helps them add to their bottom lines. It helps them achieve their status as contributors to society. No organization exists for social work. They want profits at the end of the day. And if adoption of governance and inclusivity adds to their bottom line, it makes a case. And that's one thing where earlier on the stock exchange platform, there was a lot of work that I was doing on the advocacy part.
And have you ever received pushback for your approach to your, inclusivity and equity focused leadership in the financial space? Because it's such a sort of traditional minded space. Have you ever received pushback?
No.
No.
I believe it's because I don't go all out aggressively. I build my case with a proper story, a narrative, a reason. So from that angle, it's more collaborative. The shift. You see, if you look at society, also we see that shift is coming.
Yeah.
Yes, there is inside the minds of a lot of people there is that barrier, but today, as we speak, people are not going to actually be vocal and express that uh, pushback.
Yeah.
They'll do it indirectly.
Yeah.
So gradually that change is happening.
Like,
I
they know
see
it's
that
wrong, so they're not
it's
going to be
wrong. They
obvious
won't
about
be
it.
vocal.
Yeah.
They won't be out there in your face. Although a lot of people are, as I said, 80% of our companies are SMEs, and you would see that. But no, that change is happening. I think it's our cultural thing as well.
Yeah.
For Pakistan, I would give them a benefit of doubt there. So the male domination is not that women are incompetent. It's at times it also stems from the fact that women are supposed to be respectable. I mean, this is a different angle, okay?
Okay.
That women should be respected, they should be cared for. So within a corporate setting also, you do see that sometimes come out. So if there's a woman who's returned out of from her maternity, and there is a travel that is being planned up north somewhere, they'll say, how will she go? It's not that they're questioning their competence or their ability to or the strength to travel at that point. It's the care element which is so ingrained in the male
That the woman is
setup,
weak.
that the women is weak. They have to be cared for. They can't get out and go out like that. They shouldn't.
Yeah.
They should be cared for. They should stay home or look after the child, kind of thing. So I think it's a combination. It's
Okay.
not I would say it's not um, a conscious effort to keep them out of the race.
Okay.
Sometimes
That's a very interesting take.
it's a different
I
perspective.
don't think anyone's ever given me that take, or I don't think people have heard that perspective.
But you
which
have
is
to be
interesting.
empathetic as
Yeah.
well. You see, it's
This is also the woman in you giving everyone the benefit of the doubt.
no, not really, because I've seen my father get concerned about me. If I'm out after 9 at night, he would say, hey, what's happening? Where are you? When
Yeah.
will you come home? Because he knows out there it's a dangerous world.
Yeah.
And his father instinct, parental instinct, it kicks in.
Yeah.
So it's a natural thing for men to be caring towards the women they live with,
Fair.
or they're in their ecosystem.
Okay.
So I would give that little bit of.
I think the men you work with are very lucky to have you advocating for them. Okay. So, Raida, you've broken a lot of barriers in the boardroom, but also on the dirt trails and also in this, with cycling. What draws you to these high adrenaline activities and physically demanding hobbies?
I think it just brings you back to life. It brings you back to reality. It kind of grounds you more. So yeah, that world, the corporate world, is so different, and then all of a sudden you want to be yourself, near nature, close to it, and part of it. It gives you that freedom, that liberation, I would say, and that's the feel I get. People, when you're out there, you're not Raida Latif who has a certain role or a title. You're just yourself.
Yeah.
So I think that and I'm an adventurer at heart. I would say I like being outdoors. I like doing things myself. So I guess that just kind of helps me connect with my inner self.
But like, just like your career choice, these are also sort of activities and sports that are sort of perceived to be male dominated spaces. Was there ever a point where you had to sort of assert yourself, like, I belong here, I can do this too, like
I
motorbiking
think
and
for me, the what I can say is that I was just talking a little while earlier. One of our aunts, she has done it. Actually, she paved the way for us, and I got into off-roading through that.
okay,
It was a family thing when I got married, and my husband and his family goes off-roading, so I just kind of joined the bandwagon
okay,
happily. As a child also, I preferred having a 4x4 car, automobile, I would say, rather than a car. And my father wouldn't understand why I like jeeps and trucks, that passion or obsession. Even when my elder brother, would go and buy toys, and he would buy little cars, you remember. So I would buy trucks and jeeps, and he
okay.
would say, why don't you want a car? And I'd say, no, I like this better, and when I'll grow up, I'll buy a jeep. So that thing was there, and getting married into the family kind of propelled me directly into that outdoor life.
Okay. And now you have two daughters and you take them along with you on these adventures. Do you feel like there's a sort of character building aspect to this in terms of like confidence and resilience and, just stepping into the unknown?
Yes, I think it's very important, and I think it's part the very fact how I'm carving and curating their personalities.
Yeah.
It comes naturally for my elder one to be able to set up a tent.
Yeah.
uh, they like to sleep in the tent when they're outdoors. Even if sometimes I want to be indoors, they would want to spend the night out in the tent. Okay, good. I think it kind of makes them more humane. It Normally children live in a bubble where
Very
we protect
sheltered.
them, and
Yeah.
helicopter parenting is such a thing these days. But when they're out there on the road cycling, or in the tent off-roading somewhere in the wilderness, bathing in the river, which is infested with crocs, I would say crocodiles. So I think it's I feel that it makes them have a balance. It brings them closer to humanity,
Yeah.
real life, practicality, learning to do things with their own hands, knowing what they. I think when you're out there, you kind of get time to reflect,
Hmm.
have the away from these gadgets and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
phones and mobiles. You connect at a different level, um, and you learn to appreciate nature as well. I mean, I think as we grow older, we forget that the kind of feeling you can get when you just watch the moon.
Yeah.
And if the children will make you realize, mama the star, mama the moon, the sun, they talk about these things, and they make you realize that, oh wait, stop, think, look at it,
Yeah.
appreciate nature around you. And I think that is connecting at a different level altogether.
And so, with the way you're raising your daughters, there's a certain confidence and a certain boldness that comes with, and a certain strength that comes with living this life away from like the conventional gadgets and the more indoor lifestyle a lot of kids have now. How do you sort of balance that with maybe the social pushback of the unconventional way you're raising your daughters?
I think the very fact that I'm a full-time working mother and not always there for them gives, I mean, it, I would say it's made them independent
Hmm.
from a very young age. They know they can't cling to me
Yeah.
like a normal child who has a mother who's always there for them.
Yeah.
The very fact that a mother is a working mother, and the children know how to fend for themselves
Yeah.
at a very early age. They get independent. they start realizing that, and for mothers who are always around, I mean, I don't want to be negative about it, but I think I have a novelty appeal.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So I get to spend quality, at least I try to spend quality time and instill my values in, in that time, and transfer it somehow to them.
And do you feel like sometimes people are disoriented by how confident they are or how independent they are?
Yes, some at times I've heard these comments when I send them to these play dates, and sometimes I just send them, and I tell another friend that, okay, I'm sending her, I'm leaving my daughter, I won't be there, can you like
Yeah, yeah,
help or keep an eye? And they say how, they marvel at how confident the kids are. They
yeah.
speak, because they don't have the mummy to speak for
Or the
them,
maids
or
coming
the
with the
maid, or
kids and
anybody
everything.
to speak for them. So if they want something, they'll have to speak to an auntie who is a stranger initially, of course, but they don't have that shield. So they're I feel it brings out their personality also.
Yeah,
It makes them a little more extrovert.
yeah,
Plus the very fact that they get to have these conversations with me, where I talk about my challenges, and how I overcome a challenge in a day, and that dinner table conversation or the night sleep time conversation where she shares her, or they share their day and I share my day. I'm trying to, in that way, instill in them the very fact that you have to work around challenges. How do you do that? How do you think strategically?
yes,
And that brings them to a level where they don't say, "Can I do that?" They say, "I want to do
I want to
that
do
too."
that. Yeah,
That shift from,
yeah,
okay, is it a possibility for me,
yeah,
or is it something that I want to do?
yeah,
So that, I think, has been very helpful. The other thing that I also push them a lot, that they need to, unless they ask, they wouldn't know,
yeah,
or they take that first step, they wouldn't know if they like doing something or not.
yeah.
So even at school, I mean, I'd like to share that story, that my younger one, when she, I think, was it my elder one or the younger one, when they were given houses, so she had a blue house and she said, "I want a red house." I said, "Go ask your principal." And she was like, "How can I?" I said, "What do you mean by how can I?" "Go ask her. Unless you, what if she says no?" I said, "You don't know if she's going to say yes or no.
Yeah,
So you better go walk into the office." "But how can I walk into the office?" I said, "Knock the door and walk into the office."
yeah,
Then one day I said, "Okay, this morning I will get you the time with your principal, I call it.
okay,
I'll get you that time. What you have to do is you ask. I'm not going to ask for you. Why should I ask for you? It's something you want to do." And then I got her that time. We went into the principal's office and I told the principal, she has something to ask of you. And the principal paid attention and she got it done. Well, I said, "Ask." She asked. So by demonstrating
yeah,
that one incident, now I always whenever she's at a dilemma, or any point in life where she says what if, or so I remind her of that.
yeah,
You walked in, you asked a question, you didn't know. There was always that 50% probability of no, but then there was that probability of a yes also.
yeah.
So go ahead, step out and see what it is.
So I mean, socially, women have very little access to sort of public spaces and being able to also indulge in adventures or a lot of these activities is a privilege. Um, do you think for women in Pakistan, indulging in adventure sports or these kind of hobbies is just about the thrill, or is it more about sort of reclaiming your space, reclaiming your independence, your joy? Is it like this act of sort of resistance?
I think for women, actually, for those who enjoy this, of course. But this is something you can't pretend to like.
Yeah.
You know, really, you can't really pretend. If you're not cut out for the outdoors,
Yeah.
you won't go. So for women, it's, as a person, it's about realizing that yes, this is something I enjoy doing. Once I'll do it, I'll test it out. If I like it, I'll repeat it. I think that is important. Being in, you know, it's reclaiming, I would say, or it's a form of liberation.
Yeah.
It's connecting with your inner self and being happy with your choices, with
Yeah.
your decisions. I see my elder daughter has an interest in cars. Okay, so she follows F1 very closely, the Formula 1, the
Yeah.
races. She wants to go out and photograph cars. She's been doing that at the DHA track. Every other Saturday, we'd end up there, and she looks at cars. She knows the various car brands and their sub brands and their models.
Specifications. and
Yes,
everything.
the specifications. And I haven't stopped her. In fact, my husband is more supportive of her. He would take her. He takes out that time on a Saturday, which is his golf day, by the way, and he takes her there at
Does he
times.
like
So
remind you guys that this is my golf day? We're doing this.
no,
instead.
he adjusts his time to suit her desire and her passion to for cars, and we do that. It's not every Saturday we go, but
Yeah.
like once in a while.
Yeah.
And so we alternate it once in a month or sometimes twice a month. But we support her with her passion, and she's exploring. We'll see how it goes, whether she wants to actually end up being an engineer.
Yeah.
And you know, women generally shy away from STEM subjects,
Yeah.
but I
yeah.
see that happening. Whilst she's doing that, she's following creative passions as well. So she does photography for that, and she sketches, and she's into the arts also. And during COVID, she was 10 years old, 9 years old at that time. And that's when, you know, we were home, we had all the time at our
Yeah.
hands, at our disposal. And that's where I, you know, let her experiment. So she would order those expensive paints and those canvases and those brushes, and I let her dabble. So they're able to explore, they're able to,
Yeah.
you know, find their passion. And once you have, as a female, or a child also, I mean, once you have that liberty to experiment and realize what you want to do, and that is when you'll develop your passions in the right way. That's what you'll follow a profession that you enjoy.
Yeah. And do you think there are any parallels between like navigating rough terrains and navigating a male dominated space like finance?
Yes, I think there is I think there is a parallel I can draw. These are terrains, similar to the boardroom, similar to the office environment. It's something you learn to. There are patterns that you learn to follow. The more you walk, the more consistent you are, the more you learn. I think, and that you become a pro over time, and it's like, you know, it like the back of your hand. So it's like waking up in the morning, walking into a boardroom, or you know, going off road and putting up a tent, and waking up in a tent in the morning. So it's I would say, as human beings, like Shakespeare always also said, you know, the life is a stage, and
Yeah.
you know, you kind of go and shift from one role to the other.
Yeah, exactly.
And from a daughter to a mother, I would say, from a team player, or a subordinate to a mentor.
But you manage to
that
bring your learnings from each one into
Everything,
each space.
yes. And then you evolve.
Yeah.
You need to know who's the person behind that role, and you don't become that role. You should be ready to switch, and that's the beauty, because that is when you learn to rewrite, reclassify yourself, and recapture what you enjoy, and,
Yeah.
and evolve as a human being, I would say.
And so, from your experience working across different geographies, what is the difference you've seen in how women in other countries work in finance? Wh-
I think everywhere, globally, women are still trying to break the glass ceiling.
Yeah.
In Pakistan, also, we're trying to do that. Certain corporates, it's easy because women are accepted. Certain areas, it's difficult. As a female in finance, yes, we need to. I would say, at times, I've been the only female in a hall of men, but
Right.
that is something, when I actually sometimes, a couple of times that has happened, and I was very normal till the time that I actually looked around
It's like,
and
where are all the other women?
any women here? No women? Wow. So yeah, that has also happened, and I think I would leverage on that to get my voice heard.
You're right.
And I do that.
Yeah.
I make it a point that, look, all of you are men here, and I'm the only female, so you better listen to me.
Yeah.
You have no choice.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
That's a
fun.
smart way to
also.
approach it. So what excites you about the future of financial inclusion? And especially like in regions like South Asia.
See, from a female perspective, I think financial inclusion, or it gives you empowerment. Once you know the language of
Yeah.
finance, you kind of become, you change the narrative from a dependent
Yes.
or a spender to a wealth builder.
Yeah.
That shift is coming, and yes, that narrative change will actually help organizations will have to structure their products accordingly. What other, I think women become decision makers, and they're able to influence decisions. They become stakeholders and participants,
Right.
rather than a silent follower.
And they manage to not be in situations that don't work for them anymore.
They have that voice. Then
Yeah.
they're empowered, and empowerment doesn't come all by itself, and nobody empowers you.
Yeah.
It's you who does it for yourself.
Yeah.
And and you don't even, once that happens, it doesn't happen. It's a gradual shift. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think that's one thing that organizations also need to now realize, that they need to not make a makeshift arrangement for women. You have to structure and redefine those spaces, redefine ways of working. There has to be policies, there have to be platforms. And for women, I think it gives them that ability, or that leverage to uh, become a speaker, to become a partner, to become a decision maker. And it's because of those networks, those access to knowledge, access to those tools, the platforms. That whole access
Yeah.
will help us demystify basically the negativity, or the connotations that are there with being financially independent, or being financially knowledgeable, for that
Yes.
matter. Because as women, we berate ourselves, we hold ourselves back. What if I take a decision, I make an investment, and there's a loss? Incurring loss is normal. Men incur losses every day.
So we have to normalize that.
Exactly. So for women, you shouldn't have that guilt. It's all right. It's normal. Don't beat yourself about it.
Yeah.
Next time, I'll make a more informed decision.
I feel like we need to train women to give that answer, because it's other people who also berate the women. Because women aren't
Yeah.
allowed to make mistakes.
They're
right?
not. Yes.
So
And we also are guilty
Yeah.
of doing that to ourselves.
we just need to be able to be like, yeah, so you make mistakes all the time.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, unless you go out, you take a step, you take a decision, there's always that probability of the decision going wrong.
Yeah.
What you can do is make a more informed decision with information, with doing your homework. But hey, I mean, it's all right.
Yeah. So you're now in this space where like young people probably seek you out for mentorship and advice in how to sort of break into the space of finance, or even young people who are in finance would come to you for advice on how to like navigate the difficult parts of it, what are some of the pieces of advice that you have in the past given to young people?
I think from a perspective as a beginner, I would say you start small. Go to a budget app, invest in a mutual fund, open an account, a bank account, go through that process of debiting and crediting and withdrawing and depositing and filling out that form, or reading your bank statement, understanding the language, the lingo, what every there's no, and there's no such thing as complex. It's a basic life skill. Women should, and younger a lot, I would say, they have the power, and they have the time at their end.
Yeah.
The sooner you start understanding financials and get that grip on your financials, on your money matters, you have a longer inning to play.
Yeah.
We don't have that much time. People at our age, when we begin, we have a couple of years, a decade or two maximum. But for the younger lot, I think they have the edge,
Yeah.
where they can start early and they get that longer time to compound, to multiply, to make their errors, to incur those losses, restart again. So why not capitalize on it? Start small, but build on it. And you need to be consistent.
Yeah. And what does that consistency look like?
Discipline, constant investing,
Saving.
constant learning. You begin with saving, of
Yeah.
course, but saving in itself is a useless
Yeah.
act, I would say, unless you invest that saving. So that's where the mutual fund comes in. That's the budgeting angle. A budget app would help you that, okay, this is what I get, this is what I spend. So even countries have deficits.
Yeah.
But once you start looking it at a personal level, you say, okay, I shouldn't spend more than what I make, and if I want to spend more than what I make, I better start making more. So you're able to put away something and then invest that part that you've put away to let that money work for you as well. You have to simplify things. Complex, yes, but you have to simplify it for yourself.
So I feel like if you were supposed to redesign financial systems from the ground up, but keeping women in mind, how would you sort of restructure the system?
I think with women at the center, the systems would be more inclusive, would be more flexible, would be, I think, life cycle oriented rather than plain vanilla standard products.
Yeah.
So there would be more variants of each product to suit a different life cycle stage. I think systems with women at the center are more humane,
Yeah.
more relationship oriented.
But I feel like women are very hesitant to sort of get into finance or talk money because they feel like the language is too difficult. Maybe the calculations are beyond them. What is a good starting point for a lot of women? I know you said, open a bank account and do the saving, whatever. But like, if they start investing, what is a simple way to start?
I think when you start investing, you start with mutual funds. That I found them very easy.
And how, like, again, with women, they're very risk averse because wo chances bahut kam milte hain.
That's the thing. If you go into the capital market, it's a little more high risk, I would say, comparatively.
Yeah.
Volatile hota hai market. You go into debt based or fixed income mutual funds, which are conservative, very conservative. But then when you look at mutual funds, there's a range of mutual funds. So you need to go into the most conservative ones, which kind of go and invest in treasury and bonds. They're more, I would say, low risk.
Yeah.
So that's where they begin. Again, unless you do it, you won't learn.
Yeah.
You can't read and learn.
Yeah.
Um, the experience, the experiment, the action, the learning by doing factor, that's where women need. You just need that one little nudge to walk into a branch of a bank or a asset management company or reach out to them. You can ask all sorts of questions. Now what I would say is, I think a couple of years, it's been 2 years again, 2 or 3 years, that the State Bank has issued a proper outline on banking on equality. Okay, within those policies and procedures, they have outlined and advised banks to have women, to attend to women.
Right.
So
Because
now when they're there, they have
they
that
don't
support
hesitate to ask
system.
questions
So
also.
when the woman walks in, there are other women to help them, to
Yes.
attend to them. Similarly, in whether you go to an asset management company, you go to an insurance company, you can, have people who can explain to you these things. And today, I think again, digitization has made things very easy, at your fingertips. You learn, you
So
do
much content on
everything.
financial
Yes.
inclusion.
So there's no, I would say, nothing that's rocket science anymore.
Yeah.
It is something you need to just listen to it instead of watching dramas and Netflix movies and the, I mean, okay, that's okay to watch all those series, but along with that, take out time for this,
Yeah.
for knowledge.
No, that makes sense because
You spend half an
you're
hour, 40
investing
minutes.
in your own sort of growth.
Yes.
And
Why give somebody your money
Yeah.
to manage? Generally, it has been the norm. Traditionally, I've seen, okay, that's for the men to do.
Yes.
I've often done that. Oh, that's something my husband can do. I don't want to do that. But no, unless women actually take that initiative, go out and do it themselves, whether at a small level, you don't put too much at risk. You
Yeah.
experiment, you learn, and then you get that confidence that I've done it once, I can do it at a larger scale the next time, and another step forward. So yeah, that's how you begin.
Raida, what does success mean to you now? I mean, it's something that keeps changing in meaning for us as we sort of grow older or evolve or move into different spaces. But what does it mean to you now?
Okay, earlier it meant titles and levels, and in a corporate sector and environment. At personal level, a certain lifestyle. But I think at this point, after all that evolution, that learning, I think success is what kind of impact are you bringing to people around you? What you've done for yourself, how much have you learned, how much have you developed as a person, what kind of a character or personality you are today, is how diverse it is. That is one level. Then when you look at the people around you, your children, how they're doing is also another
Yeah.
benchmark of success. Last, I think, and the most important, is what kind of impact you can bring to people around you, to the society
Yeah.
where, and to the community where you are. How many mindsets have I been able to shift or change? A conversation with a colleague on why it is important for him to let his wife work, why it is important for him to let his daughter uh, go abroad to study.
Yeah.
And if I am able to make that shift, I think I will be able to set the path for the others to follow.
Yeah.
I think
Because you've
that
just
is
set
very
something in motion.
important.
It doesn't stop there.
Talking to students who come from slightly underserved segments of society, and telling them that you guys are able to, you have that thing in you where you know how to work hard. So work on these areas, develop yourself, and reach out. So that is the impact. And I think that would be a success, if I'm able to make that impact in other people's lives.
So I feel like you also answered my next question, which was, um, what is one message you would give to women to take away with them?
I think for women, I mean, the many messages, so it's very difficult to encapsulate it into one main message. But be yourself, know yourself, uh, keep yourself as the first priority. What I want, what I feel, what I need should be the first priority. Develop yourself, grow yourself, learn to have that inner conversation. It's very important to have those kind of inner conversations with yourself. I know some people think it's not normal, but it is normal to have that conversation. And know what you're comfortable doing and what you're not.
Yeah.
Who are you? What is it that you really want? Removing yourself from that surrounding where there's peer pressure, there's parental pressure, there's societal pressure. Women should do this, women shouldn't do that. No, you, what is it that you enjoy doing? I mean, as a child, I remember my mother used to say, learn how to cook because uh, you should know how to cook. And I would say, look, it's an activity that doesn't have economic value. And she would say, listen, don't give me that.
It's a life skill.
You don't know how to cook. How will you tell your cook to what you want him to make and how to go about it?
Yeah.
So uh, and I remember the importance of those open conversations.
Yeah.
Where my mother would be sitting and my sister would say that I am not going to work, it's the man's job. And I would say, I am going to work because I want to be independent. I don't want anybody to ask me what I'm doing with money they give.
Yeah.
I want my own money.
Yeah.
And I want my own assets.
Yeah.
And how we've moved from those years to today. So I think women need to have those conversations with their parents, with their daughters, with the other women around them, with their aunts. Why not?
Yeah.
And that is very important. Know yourself, talk to yourself, have a mentor. Don't hold yourself back.
I think that was amazing. And this has been such an inspiring conversation. Raida, thank you so much
I
for
hope.
joining us on Wowcast. No, I've like, my brain is like, oh my God, I have to stay, I have to invest, I have to do this now. So you've gotten me thinking. I'm pretty sure everyone who watches this is going to start making lists about what they need to do and how they need to save. Thank you once again for joining us on Wowcast. Just bringing you all of these amazing conversations with amazing women, and we'll be back with more. Thank you.